Corbyn, Islington North MP and friend of Hastings.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here in Hastings. I've been many times and hopefully I'll come many times more. It's a wonderful place.
You always come here, Jeremy.
And a big thank you to Simon, not just for chairing today, but his work as Secretary of the Trades Council. He and I go back a very long way to the day when he managed bookmarks in Finsbury Park. And we had a very interesting time chatting together there. And I want to say a huge thank you to lots of people who've done so much work who are in this hall here today. Particularly, I want to say thank you to Myra Evans, my great friend, fantastic councillor and campaigner. The big family who in a fairer and more just world would be our MP now. And to all these stalls that are here today, from the unions, from the campaigns, particularly from the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and from Jewish Voice for Labour, because we are all here to stand up for internationalism, to stand up against racism, and to unite our movement and our working class community against this country. And Hastings, of course, has a very special place in our hearts and minds and history as the place where Robert Noonan wrote The Ragged Trousered Philanthropist, and indeed this very building was where the newspaper that failed to print his work was established. My God, perhaps the dog as well. And his book, if you think about it, I'm sure you've all read it, is this amazing imagination that workers had whilst working as building workers and decorators, of observing the class structure in the town, which he referred to as Mugsborough. Sadly, Tressel died in terrible health and in appalling poverty, and was buried with Robert Noonan in a pauper's grave in Liverpool. My great friend Eric Heffer, sadly long passed on, was always appalled at the way that Noonan had been treated by the movement that he'd done so much to inspire. And so he arranged a collection of funds to put a proper stone on Noonan's grave in Liverpool, and I went there for the unveiling of this stone. I think it was 1988 that we did it, because we should learn from our history of the bravery and the imagination of people who, up against it in the worst possible circumstances, often make the greatest creative contributions possible. I'll come to this a little later on when I say some more on international things, but think of the great words of Victor Hara, sung in the stadium in Chile before he was shot dead. So we're in a period of huge struggle. Inflation is eating into the living standards of every worker in this country. 10 years of falling living standards and falling real pay levels for the majority of workers, particularly those in the public sector, but in many private sector companies as well. And then Jeremy Hunt says we can't afford, and he and many others as well, say we can't afford to pay the pay demand of the nurses because it will lead to inflation. And wage rises will lead to inflation. Well, hang on, let's just unpick that for a moment. There's been effectively a wage freeze for most workers for 13 years since the 2010 budget, the appalling budget that was pushed through by the coalition government. Inflation is now running at, name a figure, 14% or so. Food inflation, which is much more serious for people on low incomes, because it's a higher proportion of their expenditure, is running at 19% at the moment, and likely to continue to rise until the harvests start to come in, which will hopefully reduce the price of fresh fruit and vegetables as the summer goes on. And so we're in a pretty desperate situation. So the demands, most modest they are, are simply for inflation level pay rises. So when the nurses rejected the offer they were made, they rejected it, yes, because they can't afford to accept the offer that was made, but they also rejected it because they want the health service to be properly funded, as the teachers rejected their offer for exactly the same reason, because they want education to be properly funded. And all the other strikes that are going on and will be going on are not just about wages. The postal workers who are in negotiation and have an offer at the moment they're considering, the threat to them wasn't just minimal pay increases, it was what I call Amazonization of their jobs, to become owner-drivers of Royal Mail vehicles, to be on a computer system that tracks every second they work, and they get bonus points or non-bonus points depending on when they finish, effectively ending up as automators in a gig economy. What Royal Mail were trying to do was turn them into gig economy workers. And so in all these disputes, what's interesting to me is who comes to the picket lines? Yes, the workers on strike, yes, those that support them, but also those people that want to be in a union, that are working for Deliveroo or Uber Eats on the most terrible conditions, those that are Uber drivers that need to be in a union. Our trade union movement has got to reach out and bring in all those that are so grotesquely exploited on the gig economy. And so it's also about bringing hope to people, because the issues that affect the members on strike are not just wages. I was talking to a lot of health workers outside a big hospital in London on one of the strike days, and they were actually talking to me much more about the housing conditions in which they have to live and the rent levels they have to pay because of the unregulated and burgeoning private rented sector, the lack of accessibility to council and housing association properties, and the impossibility of buying anywhere to live themselves on any kind of normal level of pay or wages. And so it is about bringing all these issues together. But we're also sort of told that somehow or other, strikes don't work, unions don't achieve anything, none of this action will ever make any difference. They always, the rich and powerful, try to diminish the power of community, of the working class, of that voice. The way our history is taught disempowers people. The way we are presented as unions and activists is always designed to diminish and disempower us. Well, we're not diminished and we're not disempowered. How did we ever get the 8-hour working day? How did we ever get a 2-day weekend? How did we ever get a national health service? How did we ever get anti-discrimination legislation? How did we ever get health and safety and welfare at work legislation? Answer: trade union action. Trade union action. Trade union solidarity. Politics of this country cannot be to offer to manage the economy more efficiently than Jeremy Hunt. Now, I know Jeremy Hunt, I've observed Jeremy Hunt's career, I've had conversations with Jeremy Hunt, and I have to tell you, in all candour and all honesty, in the privacy and secrecy of this room, any single one of you in this room could manage the economy better than Jeremy Hunt. So it is about offering an alternative. I don't want our movement to get into government and go into power merely to preside over the most grotesque levels of injustice, poverty and inequality this country has ever seen. We're not there for that. We're there to redistribute power and wealth within our society, to end the tax evaders, tax exploiters and tax havens, and fund public services properly. Yes, it will be uncomfortable for the very wealthy in our society. It's time some of them suffered a bit of discomfort. Because when we have a country with more food banks than branches of McDonald's, more people sleeping on our streets than I can ever remember in the past, when we have people living in such terrible poverty and a mental health crisis brought about by that poverty and the stress that goes with it, and so many children underachieving in an over-tested, over-pushed atmosphere in schools, then that's what brings about a mental health crisis. But what a waste of our resources. Poverty is such a waste. Those children living in insecure temporary accommodation are unlikely to achieve as much in school as others who are living in decent and secure accommodation. Any teacher will tell you that. Those underachieving kids, later on, they could have been the doctor, they could have been the engineer, they could have been the teacher, they could have been the lawyer, they could have been lots of things. They're not. Poverty wastes resources, wastes ability, and diminishes our society. I was asked during the last election campaign by a journalist, I must call him a journalist, from the Daily Mail, in front of an audience of almost 1,000 people, Mr. Corbyn, are you a patriot? Yeah, I'm absolutely patriotic. And I want to be proud of my country. And I will be proud of my country when there are no homeless people, there is no poverty, every child gets a decent school and education, and we have a full national health service. That is when I'll be proud. Because that is what we really are campaigning about. And I just want to finish very quickly because I can see Simon twitching. With purpose. Housing issues are key to a lot of what we have to campaign on. The crisis of housing in this town, in London, in all the big cities, is appalling. The insecurity of the private rented sector, the appalling standards in the private rented sector have to end. A campaign for full registration of all private rented and a rent freeze has got to be a key demand in the national market. And in defending our National Health Service, the principle of which we will all defend to the end of our days, we have to recognise, yes, sorry, it's you again, we have to recognise that the underfunding of the health service is catastrophic, but also the waste of NHS resources that are being pumped into private sector hospitals and to contractors within the NHS has to stop. We want a publicly owned NHS, a publicly run NHS. I am fed up with just always defending our NHS. We all do that. I want to see it expanding. I want to see a national care service as well. Because the stress of finding a member of your family has a condition or age or infirmity that requires them to get social care, what does it usually mean? A miasma of trying to find out what support you can get. Very good, very dedicated care workers exploited beyond belief with 15-minute visits to people who need that support and care and not being paid for the journey between the clients they have to see. And very wealthy companies running private care homes. I want to see a publicly owned and publicly run care service. And the reality is, when they tell me it's too expensive, I say, well, actually, it's being paid for now by whom? Mainly women who give up their jobs and careers in order to care for somebody in their family who cannot get the care they need from the public sector. We need to change that and demand a national care service on exactly the same principles as the national health. Now this is also about hope, and the last points I want to make are this. You've quite rightly drawn attention to the environment. You've quite rightly drawn attention to the levels of pollution brought about by private sector water companies who should be brought rapidly back into public ownership and stop the exploitation and the sewage disposal that they're doing. But it's also about our natural world and our environment. Socialists have got to understand and do that the world must survive with nature, not on top of nature, that we have to live with the world, not against the world. That means an economy that is sustainable. It means producing for need, not greed, and it also means the creation actually of good quality, well-paid, unionised, green energy and other green economy jobs. The green future is one for the graceful future that is sustainable for all of us. And this is International Workers' Day as well. This week I've been in Strasbourg at the Council of Europe. I'm on the part of the British MPs delegation there, and I spent the whole week dealing with issues surrounding refugees, asylum seekers, and the vile atmosphere that's been developing across Europe. And recently I went to Calais with Bel Rivero Addy and others to look at the situation in Calais. And then you read the British newspapers. Now, if this is Suella Braverman or any others, you'd be told that there's a marauding army coming over from Calais in small boats, that they're bringing with them diphtheria and all sorts of other terrible things, and that they've got to be stopped, and we need the Navy to go out to sea to stop them coming. I went to the Caritas Centre run by the church, which is a sort of haven for people to go to during the day, and I heard the way that desperate, lonely people have been treated. When the volunteer kitchen, and it's a wonderful setup, the volunteer kitchen takes food to people, miraculously they get stopped by the police on the way to the assigned point where the food's going to be given to the refugees, and their vehicles are checked for hours on end by the police while the documents are checked and everything else. Now the police knowing full well that the vehicle is carrying food to feed the refugees. And when water bowsers are placed where refugees might drink during the hot day, people of the far right and others come along with knives, stab holes in them so the water runs away on the pavement. It requires a particularly evil sense of purpose to go and take away somebody's ability to get a drink of water on a very hot day. And I looked at these people and asked them where they came from. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, all the places that we have been at war. We've spent billions on the war in Afghanistan. It's now the poorest country in the world, with the least human rights and the most terrible situation. So we have to make this call on this International Workers' Day. We are with the victims of war and human rights abuse and environmental degradation. We are with them. For tomorrow, there'll be our doctors, there'll be our teachers, there'll be our neighbours, there'll be our friends, and stand up against the nasty, negative racism that refuses to acknowledge these are human beings merely trying to survive in a cold, cruel and heartless world. And I say thank you to those many, many, many people in Hastings and all along the south coast who've done so much to support and help very desperate people. I would not willingly get into one of those boats to go across the channel unless I was utterly desperate. Let's have a human approach to it, not the evils of the way the media are presenting these poor, desperate people. So it is about hope. At the end of the meeting, our little team here from the Peace and Justice Project will be giving out a leaflet to you. You can all sign up to these 5 demands. A real pay rise for all, democratic public ownership, housing for the many, taxation of the rich to save the NHS, and an international policy and strategy that welcomes refugees.
Yeah.
You can all sign up for that. We want to live in a world of peace. I hate what's happening in Ukraine. I hate what's happening in Yemen. I hate what's happening in West Papua. I hate the power of the arms lobby to promote all these wars. Talk, not guns. Bring about peace in the world. Bring about peace by fighting against the causes of war, which are injustice and of greed. But it's a time of hope. May Day is the day when we remember the music, the poetry that brings us all together. It isn't just bread, it is roses too. So, in honour of what was said earlier by Rosanna on behalf of the refugees and the beautiful country that she comes from, and I was there for the recent election as an observer, and went to the grave of Salvador Allende and to the grave of Victor Jara. But the person I want to quote is the great Pablo Neruda. Cut down all the flowers, but it cannot stop the coming of spring. Thank you.
Jeremy.